Hi everyone, this is the night of the Frankie stories. Does anyone have an idea about the topic of my newest episode? I know. Oh, good evening, Chuck. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the February episode of Frankie's Stories. I'm giving you a little hint what that might be about. Imagine, if you will, a fog-shrouded street in Victorian London, the gas lamps flickering like hesitant stars. A cab stops, and from its depth emerges a tall, lean figure, his hawk-like eyes scanning the cobblestones with an intensity that pierces the gloom. He pauses, his long fingers stippled in thought, and in that moment he unravels a mystery that has baffled the finest minds of Scotland Yard. This is Sherlock Holmes, the world's greatest detective, not born of flesh and blood, but conjured from the inkwell of a frustrated physician who dreamed of something more than stethoscopes and prescriptions. This is a story of how a simple idea sparked in a Scottish mind became a cultural phenomenon that still echoes from our bookshelf screens and even our everyday language. Our story begins not in the bustling streets of Baker Street, but in the ancient city of Edinburgh, Scotland, on May 22nd, 1859. This is where Arthur Ignatius Conan Doyle entered the world, the third of 10 children in a family surviving on the edge of poverty. His father Charles was an artist and civil servant, but alcohol shadowed his talents, leaving young Arthur to witness the fragility of dreams unfulfilled. His mother Mary was the Rock, a storyteller descended from Irish nobility, who fulfilled Arthur's childhood with tales of chivalry, adventure, and mystery. She spun yarns of knights and quests around the fireside, planting seeds to what one day bloom into literally masterpiece. Arthur was a bright lad, educated at Jesuit schools where he honed his intellect and developed a love for literature. But practicality called. He pursued medicine at the University of Edinburgh, graduating in 1881 with a Bachelor of Medicine and Master of Surgery. Those days weren't just about anatomy and ailments. They were a crucible for observation. Picture Arthur in the lecture hall, scribbling notes not only on symptoms but on the subtle cues of human behavior. He served as a ship surgeon on whaling voyages to the Arctic and West Africa, adventures that broadened his horizon and fueled his wanderlust. By 1885, he married Louisa Hawkins, set up a medical practice in South Sea, England, and even dabbled in ophthalmology, opening an eye clinic in London. But patience was scarce. The waiting room echoed with emptiness, giving Arthur ample time to write. Writing was his escape, his passion bubbling beneath the surface. Doyle had penned stories since his student days, publishing in magazines to supplement his income. But medicine's slow pace frustrated him. He yearned for something grander, a way to blend his scientific mind with the storytale flair inherited from his mother. And so in the quiet hours between consultations, the idea of Sherlock Holmes began to take shape. What inspired this iconic character? Let's peel back the layers, like Holmes himself dissecting a clue. Doyle's greatest muse was Dr. Joseph Bell, his professor at Edinburgh University. Bell was no ordinary lecturer. He was a diagnostic wizard, a man who could glance at a patient and deduce his occupation, habits, and ailments from the mud on the boots or calluses on their hands or something like that. Doyle once remembered how Bell astonished a class by examining a stranger. "You're a soldier, a non-commissioned officer, and you served in Bermuda," he declared. How? The man's military bearing, his sunburned face indicating tropical service, and a specific crash common to Bermuda. This art of deduction, observing the minute to reveal the profound, became the cornerstone of Holmes's method. But Bell wasn't the only spark. Doyle drew from Edgar Allan Poe and C. Augustin Dupin, the analytical detective in stories like The Murders in the Rue Morgue. He admired Poe's logic, but wanted something more human, more vivid. The era itself played a role. The late 19th century was a time of Darwin's theories and scientific progress challenging old superstitions. Crime was rampant in London's underbelly, and public craved order amid chaos. Doyle also infused elements from his own life, his love of sports. He was a keen cricketer and boxer, his interest in spiritualism, which would later consume him, and even his medical frustrations. Thus, in 1886, Doyle sat down to write A Study in Scarlet, introducing Sherlock Holmes and his faithful companion, Dr. John Watson. Holmes was no mere invention. He was a synthesis of inspirations, a detective who embodied the triumph of reason over randomness. Published in Beaton's Christmas Annual in 1887, the story didn't set the world ablaze immediately, but it planted the seed. Holmes resided at 221B Baker Street, a fictional address that would become as real to fans as Buckingham Palace. Now, let's step into the mind of this extraordinary character. Sherlock Holmes is a study in contrast, a brilliant intellect housed in a flawed vessel. Tall with sharp features and piercing gray eyes, he moves with the precision of a fencer. His traits, foremost is his deductive reasoning. When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. He observes the trivial, a speck of mud, a frayed cough, and weaves them into narratives of crime and motive. But Holmes is no emotionless machine. He plays the violin to soothe his racing thoughts. He has his vices, a 7% solution of cocaine to stimulate his brain when cases are scarce, which was legal at that time, and tobacco smoked in huge amounts from his Persian slipper. He's eccentric, aloof, often rude to those he deems intellectually inferior, yet loyal to Watson, whom he calls his Boswell, and not to the biographer of Samuel Johnson. Holmes despises boredom. My mind rebels against stagnation, he declares, craving the thrill of a puzzle. His methods are scientific. He pioneered forensics before it was formalized, using fingerprints, ballistics, and chemical analysis. Yet, there is a romantic streak. He disguises himself as beggars and priests, boxes with bare knuckles, and pursues justice with a moral code that's flexible but unwavering. Over 56 short stories and 4 novels, from The Sign of the Four to The Hound of the Baskervilles, Holmes battles villains like Professor Moriarty, his intellect equal and nemesis, plunging over Reichenbach Falls in a dramatic death that Doyle intended as final. Doyle grew weary of Holmes. He wanted to write historical novels like The White Company, which he considered his best work. In 1893's The Final Problem, he killed off the detective to free himself. But, oh no, the backlash! Fans wore black armbands, subscription to the Strand magazine plummeted, and Doyle received hate mail, including one from a lady calling him a brute. The public outcry was unprecedented. Holmes had become more than a character. He was a hero. So why did these stories become so popular? Timing was key. The late Victorian era was one of anxiety. Industrialization brought wealth, but also crime, poverty, and uncertainty. Holmes represented certainty, a rational mind conquering the irrational. These stories were accessible, affordable, and addictive, each ending on a cliffhanger that left readers clamoring for more. Sidney Paget's illustrations cemented Holmes's image. The Deerstalker's hat, never mentioned in the text, but perfect for the moors. The curved pipe, unfortunately I don't have a pipe, and the Inverness cape. Arthur's writing style helped too. Watson's narration made Holmes relatable, a genius viewed through every man's eyes. The plots were ingenious, blending mystery with adventure, and they appealed across classes. Intellectuals admired logic, the masses thrilled to the chases. By the time Doyle resurrected Holmes in 1903's empty house, bowing to financial pressures and public demand, the detective was a global sensation. Translations spread to Europe, America, and beyond. Stage plays followed with William Gillette playing Holmes and coining the phrase, "Elementary, my dear Watson," which Doyle never wrote, but it stuck. It stuck. The popularity snowballed. In America, Holmes clubs formed. In Britain, fans petitioned for his knighthood. Doyle himself was knighted in 1902, partly for his Boer War writings, but Holmes's fame didn't hurt. The book sold millions, making Doyle one of the highest paid authors of his time. But popularity came at a cost. Doyle resented how Holmes overshadowed his other works. He once said, "If I had never touched Holmes, who had tended to obscure my higher work, my position in literature would at the present moment be a more commanding one." Yet the impact on culture, profound and pervasive, like the fog that cloaks London in the stories. Sherlock Holmes birthed the modern detective genre, influencing Agatha Christie's Poirot, Raymond Chandler's Hard-Boiled Noir, and countless others. Sherlock Holmes has been adapted more times than almost any other literary character. Guinness World Records puts him at over 250 on-screen appearances. Today we're going to spotlight some of the standout ones that have captured imaginations. First up, the Basil Rathbone films from 1939 to 1946. Rathbone played Holmes in 14 films. They're not always super faithful to the canon, but they defined Sherlock for mid-20th century audiences. So if you are new to Holmes on screen, these are still a fantastic entry point. Fast forward a few decades, we get what many Holmes purists call the gold standard, the Grenada TV series starring Jeremy Brett, 1984-1994. Brett's Holmes is intense, manic, brilliant, and occasionally unhinged. Many fans, including a lot of diehards, say Jeremy Brett is Sherlock Holmes. I can't help mentioning the Soviet television series, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, 1979 and 1986, directed by Igor Maslenikov. It features Vasily Livanov as charismatic, intense Sherlock and Vitaly Solomin as a warm, loyal, central Dr. Watson. Many fans consider this best on-screen Watson ever. The series is remarkably faithful to the stories, with excellent period atmosphere, which of it shot in Latvia. It's widely regarded as one of the greatest Holmes adaptations overall, earning Litvanov an honorary MBE from Britain. There is a well-known and rather funny anecdote about Vitaly Solomin, the beloved actor who played Dr. Watson, during a trip to London in the late 1980s. While in the city to shoot scenes for a joint Soviet Czech British film, Solomin finished his work quickly and decided to explore London alone like a proper tourist. He hopped on a classic red double-decker bus to sightsee. Sadly, two young punks robbed an elderly woman at knife point right in front of everyone, snatching her bag and laughing as they ran towards the stairs to the lower deck. Most passengers froze, but Solomon, outraged and apparently challenging his inner Watson, reacted instantly. He stuck out his leg, tripping the first robber so hard the guy tumbled down the stairs. The second thief tried to escape, but Solomon grabbed the bag with one hand holding tight. Then the punk swung the knife. Solomon punched him square in the jaw. The guy smashed his head against the window and passed out. The bus stopped, police arrived, but while they were trying to figure out how Solomon could provide his passport for identification, as it was weekend and the embassy was closed, one of the officers recognized the famous actor and said, "I know this gentleman. This is the best Dr. Watson." It turned out that sometime earlier they were doing the showings of this Soviet adaptation to the police officers, and Solomon was officially thanked for catching the robbers. They even gave him a small reward. So the story became a family legend, and now many fans love it, and it feels like Dr. Watson himself stepped off the screen to help real-life Victorian-style London. So now let's jump to the modern era. Really, like one of the best adaptations, in my opinion, the BBC Sherlock, created by Steve Moffat and Mark Gatiss, starring Benedict Cumberbatch as Holmes and Martin Freeman as Watson. Exploded on screens, became a global phenomenon. So bold contemporary update. Holmes uses smartphones, blogs, and internet instead of telegrams. So the episodes are mini movies, and this dynamic between Holmes and Watson feels so fresh, electric. Cumberbatch brings high-speed, socially awkward genius who is almost superhuman at his deduction, with those famous text layovers showing his thought process. So these adaptations sparked massive fandom, memes, and even influenced how people see the original stories. It's not faithful in the literal sense, but it's deeply respectful in spirit and incredibly entertaining. For a lot of young fans, this is the Sherlock. So we can't skip the big screen blockbuster Guy Ritchie's Sherlock Holmes' films of 2009, 2011, starring Robert Downey Jr. as Holmes and Jude Law as Watson. They're action-packed, romantic, steampunk-flavored adventures with fight scenes, wildly entertaining. So other notable influences include Disney's The Great Mouse Detective, featuring the mouse version of Holmes. Then even House MD, inspired by Holmes' deductive style, you know. From comics and anime to phrases like "elementary, my dear Watson," Holmes' legacy continues to shape detective fiction. Worldwide, there are also full musical theater adaptations such as Sherlock Holmes the Musical and various family-friendly stage versions with original songs. So there is no single best, it depends on what you want. Each adaptation highlights a different facet of Holmes: the cold, flawed human, the cold, logic-driven, the action hero, the timeless icon, you name it. So, Sherlock Holmes fandom is one of the oldest in the world. It started in the 1890s. Fans, like I said, wore black armbands when Doyle killed Holmes. They wrote their own stories, series, essays, treating the tales as real history. Today it lives on in clubs like the Baker Irregulars since 1934, plus huge online groups on Tumblr, AO3, and Reddit. The BBC Sherlock show boosted it even more. Millions of fan fiction arts, debates, especially about the romance between John and Sherlock. Yeah. And today at 221B Baker Street stands the Sherlock Holmes Museum, a narrow, perfectly preserved Victorian townhouse turned living tribute to Conan Doyle's creation. Actually, I got this hat there when I was traveling to London. You like it? Okay. Yes. So the sitting room is exactly as Watson described it. The armchair by the fire where Holmes smoked his pipe. The violin resting on the table. The Persian sleeper stuffed with tobacco. The chemical bench clutters with test tubes. Every detail is lovingly recreated, down to the unanswered letters pinned to the mantelpiece. It's so beautiful. It's a must-see for anyone who's a Sherlock Holmes fan or happens to travel to London. So it's not just the fog of Victorian London. Yeah, or the violin. It's because Conan Doyle gave us a character who is simultaneously impossible to imitate and endlessly adaptable. A true and ultimate outsider, brilliant, flawed, solitary, yet capable of fierce loyalty. He sees what we miss. So thank you so much, Chuck. I really enjoyed tonight's show, and I wanted to thank you for each and every chance that you give me sharing things that I love. I'm so happy to be a part of your show.
Look forward to these every time, and this is a wonderful exposition of Sherlock Holmes. I so enjoyed it. So thank you so much. Yeah, okay. And listeners, thank you for being here with us tonight. I hope you'll be back next week and every week, and every month in the second week we have Frankie's stories, so don't miss them. All right. Don't forget that Revolution Radio is a listener-supported network.
Thank you so much to everyone for listening and joining me tonight, for sharing, for sharing your time with me. I'm so blessed to have every and each and one of you and supporting me and taking their time to spend with me or texting me and sending me words of encouragement. I really appreciate everyone. Good night.